How many people in the room have a tablet, an iPad, or something like that? How many people in the room have a smartphone, an iPhone?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. How many of you get news off of one of these devices? Well, we're preaching to the converted, aren't we? Let me open it up to some of your questions and comments. I'm going to come back here if I can wade through without falling. And I'm going to ask you to stand. I'm going to, excuse me, Paul. What's your name?
My name's Benita Levine. I'm from South Africa. And I work with 4 radio stations there, and I wanted to ask the panel your views on Twitter. 5 years ago, if you told me we'd be telling our journalists that they need to tweet, I would have said you were smoking something. Now we are getting upset with our journalists who don't tweet. So the question is this: first of all, your advice on if you think it is a good idea, and secondly, we walk into the dangers of opinion, anecdotes, getting ourselves into a lot of trouble, and how we would go about advising our reporters to make sure they're sticking to the facts, at the same time encouraging them to get on board and make sure that we're doing something different and giving our audience something that they can't get elsewhere.
And before you answer, how many tweeters do we have in the room? Okay. Who wants to answer the question? Alberto, you want to start?
Well, I don't know if I should start, but I think you give the reporters. First of all, it's simply another tool. It's an amazingly efficient way of, I think, of following a category of news that I'm interested in. I'm interested in new media. I follow X number of people, most of whom I don't know, but whose tweets I've read over time and find interesting, and I keep up. It's in a way, it's kind of a really super fancy clipping service that you used to pay a lot of money for. It isn't what you had for lunch yesterday. You can easily unfollow those people, and almost all of them will have some kind of a link that will send me to the fuller article if I want to read that article. So the service itself I take absolutely seriously, and anyone who participates on it can either do it for fun, or if you're talking about journalists who are doing it to inform, you tell them to apply the same kinds of values and standards and ethical judgments, journalistic judgments, that they would if they were going to appear in the newspaper or on your online blog. In fact, maybe accept one step further, because they will not have the benefit of an editor who reminds them, how do you know, what's the source? And I recognize that there's an increased danger. There's also an increased edge, and that tension might actually make me pay even more attention as a reader.
What's the Online News Association's point of view?
Well, Twitter's very interesting because it's actually evolving, and watching it evolve is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What's happened in the Mideast, the tweets that came out of the Mideast from all the revolutions in Libya and Egypt and Yemen, what's happening now in Israel, you're getting this amazing surge of information, and I think the folks who are journalists who are trying to sort through all that information are finding ways pretty much on the spot, which is the way a lot of online journalism is happening, to curate it, to figure it out. Andy Carvin from NPR, who I think probably most of you follow or know, has done an amazing job doing that. I mean, he has literally turned it into an art form. He spends 18 hours a day just basically trying to figure out, sourcing the tweets, trying to figure out who is sending accurate tweets. Are these tweets that journalists should really be looking at and acting on? So to your question, I do think that there are deeper ethical questions about Twitter and how it's being used, but I think they're all being worked out by the people who are actually using it. And the days of coming up with ethics policies, I think, are somewhat gone. And maybe that's
whoa, whoa.
Well, let me finish that sentence before I get lynched. I don't think gone in the sense that we're just throwing them away. I think gone in the sense they're being remade daily, because that's the only way you can do this. To put down to lay down a rule about how things should be used, how devices should be used, how social media should be used, and then the next day something new happens and you have to rethink that rule. It's a collaborative effort at this point, I think.
Tom, quickly, if you would.
Yeah. When Twitter started, I think people thought that it would be journalism told in 140 characters at a time. And I think what we're seeing is it's being used as a pointing device. Look at this, look at that. Right. There is some inefficiency there. I mean, the Carden phenomenon that people talk about, the idea that you want to get your news by, going to 85 tweets, and that's somehow exciting for most people, I think I'm not so sure. I mean, I think efficiency, going to a place where you can get news quickly, still has a lot of appeal for a large part of the audience.
I heard today that the airport in Miami was closed because there had been an explosion. The first place I went to was Twitter.
Really?
Somebody on the ground was going to
All
tell
right,
you
so
what it was.
Somebody was telling me what was happening.
Yep.
I'm going to go over to Shirley Carswell here, who's with the Washington Post, having heard that the first place Alberto went was Twitter when he heard that. Could I ask you to stand up for just a second? Because we chatted earlier, so I'm not completely ambushing Shirley here. But Shirley, I'm interested in how you and the Post handle the tweets that come in from all over the world. And do you have somebody who sits there 24/7 or an army of 24/7ers going through and saying, we'll follow this one, we won't follow that?
No.
In a word.
No armies, huh?
No armies.
That could fit in a tweet, you know.
Yeah. Individual reporters tweet and check out tweets, and we have editors who are looking at them and examining them and evaluating them.
Is this a game changer, or is this just another way to get sourced or unsourced information?
I think it's another way. I have a question for the panel, though. I was interested in your comment about the audience is wider but shallow. And so I'm wondering what you think about the more specialization of websites. And so is that the answer, to go deeper? Instead of, newspapers have traditionally been sort of mass media, generalized news. Is that a potential answer, to go very deep in one particular area, one topic?
I don't think you have very many success stories doing that. I think the bottom line thus far is hyperlocal equals micro revenue. I think that I've seen more hyperlocal ventures that destroy value than actually create it. That's not to say that it's impossible. I can think of a few examples. But I think that what we saw here in DC with the demise of TBD, I think really highlights the difficulties of this.
Let's explain what TBD is for our international audience here. TBD is a venture that was started by Robert Albritton across the river. He owns and runs WJLA, a big television station, an ABC affiliate. He also has a cable channel, News Channel 8, and he started this thing that ended up being called TBD, as what was supposed to be a new online-driven, online-first news initiative, hyperlocal, using aggregated and original content from small communities around the community.
So I think the broader way to think about this, or at least the way that I've been thinking about this recently, is to think about the entire size of the online advertising market. So the last full year we have numbers for is 2009. So it's about a little less than $23 billion. More than half of that goes to Google. Another 15% or so goes to Yahoo. Right? So what you're really left with is arguing over dividing up the remaining $20 per person. Okay? And thinking about the effectiveness of local news sites, one way to think about it is how many people and how much of their attention are we going to get? And if we're thinking about monetizing that, we're really talking about arguing about how much of that $20 slice per person we're actually likely to get. And this brings us back to the other problem with page views, is that you see a lot of these sites with TBD that seem like they've got really impressive unique visitor numbers, they've got really impressive page views. The problem is that page views are really not as impressive when you actually dig into them, because so many users look at dozens and dozens and dozens of pages a day. So, and a typical page view, depending on which source you're looking at, can be less than 30 seconds in a lot of these sources, right? So think about the costs of getting somebody's attention for 30 seconds of advertising time on television, right? Think about how valuable that is, or isn't, and apply that to a local news framework where you don't even have their undivided attention. You've got one little slice of an ad off to the side of the page.
I agree with all of that. There is one important sort of exception to that, and that is if you can, there's a lot of evidence that if you can create verticals or niche for a pay audience, for a professional audience that needs this information and is willing to pay a large subscription for it, you can make a lot of money, not advertising-based. And that would be the Bloomberg model, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, which are having success with paywalls.
And there are other things like something like Aperture that allows a publisher to let the viewer go deeper into information and explore information without leaving the site, that could eventually have some really interesting money consequences for the publisher. And I also think that that with the development of technology, you can take away more and more of the cost of the advertising, making it easier for the local advertising to happen, and to the extent that you reduce your costs, you've increased your actual profit.
Another question I see from the floor.
Potential
Did you have one? And then I'll come around here. Let's see if we can tell us who you are and where you're from.
I'm Lisa Kastner from Bloomberg in New York.
Speaking of Bloomberg.
Speaking of Bloomberg, and this is kind of a related question. I'm wondering if anyone on the panel can speak a little bit about the value of the brand. It seems to me that when the Japan thing happened, I went right to the New York Times, despite my daily looking at all kinds of other things. There is a value, it seems to me, in the long-term relationship with an established news organization and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the long-term value of brands and how brands come and go in this rapidly changing universe.
I went to Twitter first for the explosion at the Miami airport to see if anybody was at the airport and tweeted it and picked it up. But
so you weren't looking for a brand, you were looking for an eyewitness.
To get what happened, the explanation, I'll go to the Miami Herald because I trust that brand.
Tom, what do we know about brands?
There's sort of two contradictory things going on here, I think. One is that the old model of whether something was reliable was brand. You trust it because it was in the New York Times, or you trust it. Walter Cronkite would finish the newscast by saying, "And that's the way it is," and you'd say, "Yeah, that's the way Walter said so."
And good night and good luck.
Right. We're getting to the point where the atomic unit that we trust is not necessarily the news institution. You go and when people are online, they're looking for a story. So Alberto goes, I want to find out about this. He's not going to the Miami Herald or wherever he's going to say, tell me everything that's going on. He's diving in for a particular
Some of the
story.
visionaries I've talked to in the business, Tom and the others, say, forget the brand, that you're going to increasingly be getting news from your social network. You're
right.
going to be getting
and
your
that's
referrals from your
the,
friends and the people you trust,
yes.
not necessarily the brand you trust.
Right, absolutely. The majority of adults are now emailing stories to each other. 40% of people get news from non-news sources on social networks. So all of that works against this old model of brand. On the other hand, we have research that suggests that most people only regularly go to 6 websites, that they don't venture very far, and that when they are searching through links, even though they weren't going to the New York Times, when they are picking among those links, the brand does matter.
Jane,
so you've got sort of 2 pressures going on at the same time, and Google is a huge brand reinforcer. Cooked into the special sauce of their algorithm are things that help the New York Times.
Online News Association, you talk about citizen journalists a lot. So citizen journalists don't have a brand. So is that your experience, that brand is still king?
Yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable with the term citizen journalist. I think it's sort of 5 years ago to a large extent. There's people who are entrepreneurs now. I mean, I think there's people who have sort of started themselves on the road to media and maybe don't have a journalism background but have become journalists learning.
But what they don't have is a brand.
What they don't have is a brand. That's absolutely right.
But
I think that makes them more trusted in some people's eyes than possibly like the New York Times or the Washington Post. Not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm saying that's sort of the reality.
Okay, back to the audience. Let's come over here, and then I'm going to come to the back of the room. Excuse me.
Hi, Jim Barnett. I'm with AARP Publications and an MPA candidate here at the Trachtenberg School, too. Jane, I wanted to follow up on your comment about number 2, content is king. These emerging media companies, how do you think they feel about underwriting big content, public affairs reporting, the Baghdad Bureau, those kinds of stories that you really can't get off your social media feed. But again, sort of the big stories that newspapers have done so well over the years.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this. I think, first of all, to go back to the reasoning, Google, AOL, Yahoo, especially Google, it has a front row seat to everything that's on the internet, basically through search and through the incredible talent they have there. And what they're seeing is, frankly, a lot of junk. And I don't think they're any happier with it than anybody else is, and they've made that pretty clear. So how do you go about, if you're a company that specializes in technology and search, how do you go about becoming a media company? And I think it's very plain that the partnerships they're making is how they're going to do that. And partnerships at a very high level. And when they start to do that, I think they'll begin to get their advice from these folks. And I think you will see probably deeper international reporting, because I think they'll see that when you go back to it, you need to know what's happening around the world. I think you'll see more in-depth domestic reporting. I think the hyperlocal, the micro-local, will probably make another resurgence because of that. This is all based on just, speculation and what I've seen with these companies. But I do think it's going to make a difference.
I'm in the back of the room now. And tell us who you are and go with your question.
Hi. I'm Terry Clifford, and I have a question that's based on some of the conversations I've had with these female executives. It seems that many of the folks that are represented here, their media is not declining as fast as ours in the U.S. has done. So we're sort of at the precipice of the media decline. And I'm wondering if, based on your research, you have any advice for folks who are here. Would you say, for instance, that newspapers were in denial, that cable, which has started to slide in audience for the first time, has been asleep? What would your advice be?
My advice would be that the idea of being platform agnostic is insane. You have to be platform orthodox. You have to believe in the potential of each technology and exploit it. That if you think, well, we're a newspaper company, we don't care if we put it on the web, we'll put it on the phone, it's all the same to us, you're going to be destroyed by the people who understand the potential of a digital phone and make that technology work better than it could. If all you're doing is putting the same stuff everywhere, you're going to be putting newspaper content on devices that have much more potential than that.
I think I agree with you, but I'm not sure. Because I
disagree,
think,
please.
Okay, so I'll disagree just for the purpose of pleasing Frank. But so really, so what you mean by platform agnostic is not that a news organization should not attempt to reach the audience wherever the audience is, but that you should reach it in ways that are appropriate for the medium.
And that you should understand that each medium has its strengths and really exploit those.
Sorry, Frank, I agree with him.
We were so close. John has a question.
Hi, John Ebinger with the RTDNF and here at GW. To what extent might all of this be dated, given that we're going to start seeing paywalls very soon?
I suppose to the extent that the paywalls are really effective. I don't know that paywalls are going to be the definitive changing element. I think everything we've seen in the last, 10, 15 years suggests that as soon as you start getting kind of comfortable with one sort of technology, something else comes up, and if it's not a new device, it's some kind of new application of that device. I think the paywall is serious. I think the paywall, I believe that eventually people will need to figure out how we're willing to pay for content, just like you're willing to pay for what used to come over the air and broadcast by paying your cable bill.
And don't you think we're getting habituated to that a little by little? I mean, if you have an iPhone now and you want to buy an app for 99 cents or $4.99, you go and you do it. If you want to buy a piece of music, you go and you do it. If you want to reserve a table or buy a ticket, you go and you do it. We are transacting. We are paying for things? Or is news somehow different and going to be even more resistant to that? Jane, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think one of the problems with this conversation is that we've had it so many times, and we always come back to the same thing. We don't know.
But it doesn't stop us from trying.
It does not stop us from trying and having many discussions about it.
It is interesting that Europe has slid less, because Europe was much more accustomed to paying for news. The 85% of news in a newspaper was subsidized by advertising, so you could afford to sell it for 25. You could afford to sell the paper for 25 cents at a time when a European counterpart would sell for €1. People were used to paying for it. But you know what? Television used to be free, and now I have to pay $100 for a cable, or whatever it is, for a cable.
That's because you want 800 channels.
I need 850.
We have a question here. We have a couple. We'll go around. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Carolyn Byerly from Howard University School of Communications. I'm wondering, I'm looking at your myths and I'm listening to the conversation, and I'm wondering where women and those on the social margins fit into this scenario. I haven't heard any discussion at all about essentially what brought those of us in this room together. Thank you.
Which is what? I mean, elaborate.
Which is the status of women in the news media.
Jane? Go ahead. Your question's related. Let you stand up, introduce yourself. And
mine is Rosemary Okello Lally from Kenya. My question was about market audience segmentation. That over the years, unlike before, where the mass media you could just write for the public, people are becoming specialized. There's the children writers, the youth, and the future of the media, we are told, belongs to the youth. What is the myth about this market audience segmentation? Youth, women?
You know, I'm not sure these things are gender specific, these myths that he's got up here. I think this affects everybody. If you wanted to have, we could have a different conversation, it seems to me. But the legacy media losing audience, it's losing audience among men and women. It's losing audience because if it's losing the audience, it's losing it because it loses relevance to both men and women.
You know, what we see is that the ability for a niche publication to emerge and identify its audience and to reach them is easier than it's ever been. But as Matt points out, the ability to monetize that is limited. In the 8 years we've been doing this study, the top 5 websites have remained completely stable. And they are Yahoo, CNN, AOL, and I'm forgetting one. MSNBC, followed by the New York Times. Why are they there, and why have there been no changes there? It's because they can aggregate huge numbers of audiences, and that people can find what they want. You know, you can, you know, at the same time, you can also go to these micro places and get exactly what you want. And I think that, and Matt's research has shown that, you know, the strength is at the very top of the tail and at the very bottom, and it's in the middle where I think things are most vulnerable. So I think the ability to reach very targeted audiences is powerful, but the idea that the audience is fragmenting to 1 million places and that there is no common square anymore isn't really borne out by the data.
Jane, let me play off the question in terms of women for a minute with you and what the Online News Association sees and represents. Are there more women's voices there? Is there more access and influence in this discussion in what we're seeing in the online entrepreneurial news category?
Yeah, I think so. Our board is led by a woman, Christine Montgomery, who's PBS managing director. I am the executive director of the organization. We have 6 other women on a board of 15. And we feel as though the woman's voice is heard very strongly and clearly in the organization. And we are seeing more and more women mobilizing, literally mobilizing, to try to, especially taking advantage of the entrepreneurship piece of this, and realizing that they can start websites, they can start blogs, they can start news sites that are dedicated to women's issues, but not just women's issues, across the board. So there's not so much an agenda there, I don't think, as there is just really the feeling that this is an open big tent for women.
But if I could just follow up on that, I think that some of this is speculative, but we now have, I would say, highly suggestive evidence that women as news consumers do use social media somewhat differently, that they are somewhat more likely to pass on articles. And in fact, I think we've got interesting research that suggests that women journalists, at least in a few high-profile news organizations, actually are more successful at getting their articles retweeted and linked on Facebook. And that's actually a pretty important part of the bottom line now, increasingly.
Do we have a why? Do we have a why behind that?
What's that?
Do we know why that is?
There's a number of different. It seems to hold true even controlling for the section in which the article is written. So it might be stylistic differences. It also might be, we've seen in other cases, it might also be the case that women journalists face different barriers, perhaps higher barriers, and that those who succeed in getting to a place like the New York Times might be, on average, better than their male colleagues. Okay?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we've seen this historically in a bunch of other professions, right? It wouldn't be
You suddenly become very popular, man.
Right, I know. it wouldn't be. It's at least a possibility to account for.
That's very interesting. Here, another question. Yes, ma'am.
I apologize for getting off the women issue. Just a bit back to business. How do we make money from the websites? And I'm asking because I come from a region where we're actually not making any money. Then any suggestions on revenue sharing? Because it's true we can't run away from the people who have the technology, but do you have any tips, depending on what you've gone through in America, on how revenue can be shared to the benefit of the media house?
What are we learning? Tom?
Well, first of all, the idea that the internet is free is not true. I pay $30 a month for this thing. I pay $30 a month for the one at work. I pay another $30 a month for the one at home. So I'm already paying, $150 or something just to get to the internet. But that revenue is not being distributed in any way to the content producers. Now, I think we're discovering that it's going to be not the audience that you aggregate, but what you know about that audience and how you can share that information with advertisers to help them help their business. One of the trends we're seeing, particularly in the magazine world, is, and to some extent in the community news world, is that these news sites are becoming marketing consultants for potential advertisers. I know a lot about audience, you've got goods to sell, let me help you figure out how to reach them. Not just on my site, but in general. And you've actually seen some major companies like Hearst go out and buy marketing firms because they want to develop that as a big part of their business. And interestingly, so you see that at the very top of the field, and you see the same phenomenon with the one-man band micro community site who's saying that the pizza parlor guy, he sits down with him and tries to help him figure out how he can improve his business.
Alberto, any advice? Observations?
Yeah, I think without knowing your market, I really don't know what I could tell you, except to pay attention to your market, pay attention to your readers. What do they need? What is it where are they? How do they receive information, and then work back from that.
Jane?
I would like to ask her what region she's from. I didn't catch that.
Uganda.
My knowledge of Uganda may be sparse. But I would suggest exactly what Tom has suggested and what Alberto suggested. I think it's knowing your audience. It's knowing that that's really your expertise. That's where your knowledge comes in.
Folks, I know there are more questions, but the time has come and the time is short. But I think this has been a fascinating conversation. A couple of thoughts, if I may. One is I really appreciate the conversation, Tom. The work that you and the Project for Excellence in Journalism do is just first rate. Just so you all know, those of you who are part of IWMF, last year we did a full day where we took apart and analyzed this Project for Excellence in Journalism report. And what we did working with Mike and with Liza this year is we thought we would have our work with it, that SMPA, our partnership with them, be part of your event and then also open it to other people. So this is a form of sharing, and I hope it worked for you. It's a scary, strange time filled with myths, but it's also a remarkable thing as we watch what's happening around the world. And those of us who have done it and those of you who are doing it, we're all kind of on the precipice together. But I do think, and I find that this is the case with our students, that there is a great sense of sort of adventure and enthusiasm that doesn't negate the challenges and the business models that we're up against. But I kind of am animated by one central premise throughout, and that is that never before in human history have so many people had so much access to so much information so fast. And being able to digest it and sift through it and sort out, as Shirley was saying, the good, the bad, the ugly is of course the challenge. But I think the myths help us, and Jane and Alberto, Godspeed, because we gotta seed the clouds and the soil to see good things grow. Matt, thanks for your research and everything you've done, and Tom, again, thanks for the report, and thanks to all of you. Liza?
You really should be.
Yes, one more time, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the IWMF, many of whom are here in the audience, and in my name, I would like to thank our panelists, Tom, Frank, for these wonderful insights. To our delegates, after a 10-minute break, a small 10-minute break, we will continue.